Point Pleasant Park is situated on Kitchapatuck, specifically the area known as Amuntakai, a name designated meaning spirit place. This area is of great cultural significance because it is the place where the Mi'kmaq believe the Great Fire Spirit originated from. This is critical to the Mi'kmaq creation story. Post-colonial uses of Point Pleasant Park date back to the 17th century, where it was used as a chapel grounds. In the 18th century, 7 fortifications were constructed in Point Pleasant Park. The batteries were abandoned during the First World War. In 2003, much of Point Pleasant Park was destroyed after Hurricane Juan. The hurricane was estimated to have destroyed more than 80,000 trees within the park. After the hurricane, the canopy of the forest was significantly reduced. Point Pleasant Park is known as an Acadian forest, which is the dominant forest type in the Maritimes. Typically, these forest types boast rich biodiversity and are habitats for many plant and animal species. Point Pleasant Park is home to many native species of trees, shrubs, mosses, wildflowers, birds, and insects. This study focuses on the succession in Point Pleasant Park following Hurricane Juan. Ecological succession is the process by which a biological community changes relative to the time elapsed. This study focuses mainly on secondary succession, which occurs when a previous community is disturbed to yield a larger scale change in the community present. A variety of data was collected to determine community metrics like the total density, Shannon Diversity Index, density of dominant species, species richness, and species evenness. Many similar studies have been conducted measuring secondary succession in ecosystems following hurricanes. One that is of particular interest is a study conducted by Burley Robinson and Lundholm, where scientists focused on the recovery metrics of Point Pleasant Park following Hurricane Juan. Their data was collected only in 2005, and therefore the data collected for our study follows a wider scope, yielding different results than the aforementioned study. The objective of this study is to measure the ecology and succession in Point Pleasant Park following Hurricane Juan. Our predictions and null hypothesis for each of the 3 research questions were recorded on this slide. 1. How has the overall forest community changed over time? 2. How has the density of the dominant species changed from 2004 to 2024? And finally, how has the Shannon Diversity Index changed over time?
Methods, we'll start with the tree data collection. So the trees were measured. All the living trees were with a diameter at breast height, or DBH for short, of greater than or equal to 2.5 centimeters was measured and identified. The DBH was measured at 4.5 feet from the ground, consistent with forestry industry standards, and basically measuring the DBH provides an estimate of the total wood volume within a forest stand. And so this industry standard metric enables researchers to compare their findings with existing forestry data, which allows for potential integration of industry data into their research. And then for ground flora sampling, we did there was a quadrant sampling procedure. So the percent cover of ground flora was sampled within each study site using 12 1 meter squared quadrants, and the quadrants were randomly placed within the study site by dividing them into 6 groups, with each group responsible for multiple quadrants. And so this random placement method was done by taking like a brightly colored object, which was tossed over the shoulder of a group member's shoulders, and the landing point marked the center of the quadrant. And after recording the flora data within the first quadrant, the object was tossed again from this initial location to establish the next sampling area. And so this process continued until 12 quadrants were sampled per study site, and then within each quadrant, the percent cover of each species was estimated by the group members and consensus, and then recorded on the data sheet. So then linear regression was used to detect the relationship of the chosen variables over time, as linear regression is used to measure things when they're constant. A regression analysis was used to show the total density in Point Pleasant Park after the hurricane. The R-squared value was 0.4926, which is a weak relationship between the time and total density in the early stages. The density has a decreasing trend with 4.75 individuals per 400 meters squared in 2004 to 2.4 individuals in 2008. And then there was a rapid increase in density, reaching 15.2 individuals per 400 meters squared, and that was by 2009. And then it was continuing to grow to 157.8 by 2019. So we then noticed some slight fluctuation, ending at 103.6 individuals per 400 meters squared in 2024, and then it just continued to lean towards a more stable number.
To investigate the changes in the dominant species from 2004 to 2024, population density of the red spruce and the red maple was collected in the surveyed areas of Point Pleasant Park. Regression analysis was used to determine the relationship between the population density of red spruce and red maple between the years of 2004 and 2024, and the succession in the forest community at Point Pleasant Park. There was a significant positive relationship between the years elapsed and the density of the red spruce population, with a p-value of 0.0009. Furthermore, there was also a significant positive relationship between the years elapsed and the density of the red maple population, with a p-value of 0.0002. This indicates that in the years following the hurricane, the populations of red spruce and red maple were able to recover significantly.
Okay, so here we have the Shannon diversity, which was measured at Point Pleasant Park, Nova Scotia, from 2004 to 2024. And we have a regression analysis, which was used to show the relationship of species diversity after the hurricane. And the R-square value was 0.3352, which did show a very weak relationship. And in early succession, the species diversity was relatively high, with a value of 1.386. Until 2008, it had a significant drop to 0. And then from then, the values increased relatively steady with small fluctuations until reaching a value of 1.71 species diversity.
What has the overall forest community changed over time, and what can we predict will happen to the overall community as the forest moves towards its climax community, and why? So the overall forest community has changed a lot over time. So we had an early post-disturbance period. So this was right after the hurricane. The forest community likely consisted of surviving trees and pioneer species, which are typically fast-growing and adapted to disturbed environments. And these early species contributed to the initially low density observed in the first few years, which was the 2004 to 2008, which was seen in our figure 1. We then had to a mid-successional stage, so this was between the years of 2009 to 2014. The forest experienced a rapid regrowth as evidenced by the sharp increase in the total density, again seen in figure 1, and this phase reflects the colonization of the new species and increased competition for the light and space. And so the forest community became more diverse, with species filling the available ecological niches. Then we finally have our later successional stage, which was 2015 to 2024. The forest reached its peak density, but slight fluctuations occurred because we had a density drop in 2021, which suggests that the community is transitioning towards a more mature or climax community where fewer but more competitive, long-lived species would dominate, and this stage typically involves slower growth as the ecosystem stabilizes. And so these changes occurred as the hurricane opened up space and resources by knocking down many trees and creating gaps in the forest area, and this has allowed for a flush of new growth, primarily of, as I said, the fast-growing, more opportunistic species. And in the early and mid-successional stages, the availability of light and nutrients and space allowed for the rapid recolonization, as again stated before. And so as the forest continues to recover and approach its climax community, the density stabilization or decline, so we may see a more stabilized or slightly declined competition intensifying and resources becoming more limited. And we have dominance. We have dominant tolerant species, so over time, slower growing shade tolerant species will dominate the forest, and we will have an increased ecosystem stability.
The red spruce was the dominant tree species in the surveyed areas from 2004 to 2008, where most of the trees sampled within the study area were red spruce. In the following years, the dominant tree species was the red maple. The number of red maple individuals sampled greatly outnumbered the number of red spruce individuals. In 2024, 44 red spruce trees were sampled within the total study area, whereas 178 red maple trees were counted within the same study area. On the contrary, 13 red spruce trees were sampled in 2004, with no evidence of red maple trees in the same year. Interestingly, the diameter of trees at breast height was wider until we see the colonization of the young red maple trees in 2009. Literature like the 2017 Ecological Land Classification for Nova Scotia suggests that the red spruce is the dominant long successional species in Acadian forests. Based off the results, it would appear that the red spruce trees remaining in the sampled areas were older growth compared to the newer growth red maple trees that colonized the same sample area during the hurricane. The population of red maple trees grew exponentially with lots of variability from year to year, while the population of red spruce was more consistent and showed a smaller increase over the years.
So how has the chosen community metric changed over time? So species diversity rose from 2004 to 2024, and one of the factors contributing to the growth is seed dispersal, which can occur through natural disasters like the hurricane that happened, and this shifts seeds away from parent trees and reduces competition. Loss of dominant species leave room for less competitive species to develop and grow, overall boosting biodiversity. Nutrient cycling also had an effect. Organic breakdown of trees and shrubs and decomposers from natural disasters releases nutrients into the soil, benefiting a wider range of plants and increasing soil fertility. And then for what we can predict will happen to the chosen community metric as to forest moves towards its climax community. Well, until the climax community is reached with a large number of species and niches will be established, species diversities will continue to grow, and there'll be a rapid growth of grasses and ferns and other fast-growing trees and plants that thrive in open distributed environments. With less competition and more sunlight available, there's going to be a greater diversity because there's going to be fewer competing species, and this is going to show a peak during the mid-successional stage because both plant-loving and shade-tolerant plants are still present and both species are going to be able to coexist. And then for late successional stage, species like more mature trees and grow slower and outcompete some of the pioneer species. So the predictions of the current succession stages of the Acadian forest will have an upward trajectory with occasional dips due to urban factors like pollution, human disturbances, and other physical stressors, which will influence the pace of succession processes. And with early succession, we're still going to see a fast-growing species that are going to take over with like high amounts of light available to promote rapid growth. And then deep composition of plants and species prior will improve soil fertility. And then with mid-succession, we're going to have a small number of trees beginning to establish. And then for late succession, a stabilized forest will form and the nutrients in the soil will be much more increased and the mature plants will take over. Now, succession can be significantly impacted by being an urban park, and plants can be harmed or stressed by human disturbances like pollution, which can change species competition. It may cause the forest to reach its climax community much slower. An example of how succession may be impacted is just individual movement and footwear. Footwear is actually a secondary dispersal mechanism, and when walking through forests, the shoe can like pick up seeds and they can spread a lot further than they would naturally. and more non-native species can be found in the larger cities like Halifax as well. Existing habitats or ecosystems can be removed or altered by fragmentation and habitat modification, which may remove species and significantly lower their density. And today, Mi'kmaq continue to maintain a deep and profound relationship with their traditional lands, waters, and resources. And this long-standing relationship has given rise to the Mi'kmaq ecological knowledge regarding the natural environment. Their lessons and practices explain the value of using native species that maintain ecological balance and protect biodiversity. And by giving preference to native trees and like the eastern hemlock, the sugar maple, red spruce over non-native ones, this strategy can direct replanting initiatives in the park, and they encourage and interact with natural cycles, including succession and seasonal change, which will help identify natural patterns and disruptions, and this is something we can learn to do and help us in the future.